But what there was a vacuum for anything on the alcohol side that was organic.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
All right, so my guest today is Keith Barnes. He is the founder of Bainbridge Organic Distillers, strangely enough, located in Bainbridge Island. Keith, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Glad to be here.
So I'm a lifelong resident of Washington, and I just remember being younger and distilleries were a no-no and all of that. And so it looks like back in 2008, the state changed.
Yep.
And then shortly after that, you opened up Bainbridge Organic Distillers. Why? How did that process get started? And then we'll talk about you, but I just want to get that question out there. It's like, what was the inspiration and motivation to start a distillery?
I think that the main thing is that it's not like I thought that the world needed another distillery. There's tons of distilleries out there, and even at that time, the huge distilleries, for the most part, a lot of them were making unbelievably delicious products. So it's not like there was a vacuum for great whiskey. But what there was a vacuum for anything on the alcohol side that was organic, other than maybe a few brands and some organic beer that was out there. And I started to experiment with different mashes and with different techniques in about 2005 to see if it was possible to use organic technology and organic ingredients, which are sometimes ridiculously old school, to make a whiskey and have it turn out that might be good enough that people would actually buy it. I think it's important to note at that time, buying an organic product, you weren't necessarily guaranteed to be getting a product that was better. In fact, at that time, a lot of people shied away from organic production because they thought that it wasn't going to taste as good as the stuff that they had all of their, that has all the stuff in it that you might not want in there. And our tests were really successful. And then the state changed the laws to allow for distilling on a small scale with a tasting room that could sell product out the front door, which was critical for us because it's hard to compete if you can't get your product sampled. And so when they changed that law, I just put up the kit and filled out the applications and went for it. And I'd been in the spirits industry for about 25 years and working for all of the majors in marketing. And so it was really kind of a natural extension of what I'd already been doing. The only thing I really hadn't done at scale was actually make a whiskey and market my own whiskey.
So were you living on Bainbridge Island at this time?
I was.
Is that where? Okay.
And I'm a Washington resident lifelong as well. I have lived a couple other places, but always ended up back here just because I like it here.
So what is it about Bainbridge that calls you home? I mean, what is it, sell Bainbridge Island to us. How's that?
Well, I'd say it's really that it's a perfect combination of a lot of different factors and a way of life and a certain kind of atmosphere. The island is heavily forested from one end to the other. Most of the new development that goes on here, if it's not in the core, is at 5 acres or above. So we don't have tons and tons of housing going in. We don't have terrible traffic here because there's not that many people that live over here. It's still just a half hour away from Seattle, and you don't even have to have a car to come over. And it's 25 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the traffic, to the airport. So I fly out every once in a while. Was traveling a lot more when I first moved here, but it's got kind of the best of everything that I was after: a great environment, good lifestyle, low crime, good schools, the whole thing.
I'm moving to, no, I'm kidding. We moved from the Seattle Tacoma area over to Wenatchee, and I kind of the same reasons, but for me, it's I appreciate the warmer weather and the real winters. I mean, it's kind of weird. I like it. I like 4 seasons versus, to me, the Tacoma area where I grew up was kind of always, it just seemed like it was always October.
Yeah.
So you started this, and when we talked the other day, you mentioned that, being an all organic product has not been the simplest or the easiest thing. And that you source a lot of your stuff, your wheat is coming from Washington State and things like that. You haven't deviated though. You've stayed organic the entire time. Correct?
That's correct.
That's your thing. And now how does it feel that your products are winning all these awards? You're held in very high regard as a distillery. Has it been worth it?
I think so. I think that the truth of it was that, as I said at the beginning, I'm a big believer in the whiskey category and in spirits in general. There's tons of absolutely top-notch spirits that are out there, and if I couldn't find a way to make one on the organic set, which I think really is a unique feature and something that not everybody is doing because it's more difficult to do and it's more expensive to do. I think if I couldn't have pulled that off, I just wouldn't have done it. I mean, I started, most of my experiments when I first started were with single malts, and you're looking at, but you call them the competition when you're making it at such a small scale, but you're looking at it and going, okay, am I going to make a single malt that's better than Macallan or better than Bowmore or better than whoever? That's it. That's a daunting challenge. And to be able to make it organically, if you can do it, it seemed like that was really a way to differentiate myself in the market. And it was a way to be more true to what my beliefs are, which are just to try to have as small of a footprint as you can. And critically, I'm a collector of old alcohol as well. So I've got a collection of several hundred bottles of whiskey dating all the way back to, I think my oldest bottle is from the 1870s. And then all the way up through the 20th century to modern. I kind of collect, in the whiskey sets, I collect pretty much everything. My sweet spot is between the 20s and the 50s. And when you taste that old liquor, you're like ruined for that category for the rest of your life. You taste a good bourbon from the 30s or the 40s, and you pick up your bottle of bourbon that you spent $100 for at the store, and you pour them side by side. There's not even a contest. It's like that other bottle. That new bottle shouldn't even be on the table. It might infect the old bottle, because the old stuff is so marvelous. It's unbelievable. And one of the other reasons to go organic was, as I'm doing the processing and we're wrestling with formulas and we're wrestling with how do you actually bring this stuff off without modern enzymes and without modern yeast nutrients and salts and all the rest of it? How do you turn the clock back and actually do it? One of the goals was maybe by simplifying it and by using ingredients that weren't genetically modified and weren't the product of a big lab. If you're forced to make it the way that they used to make it, and at the time, most organic grain that you could get was all throwback grain. It was grain that had been developed early on, maybe in the 60s, maybe in the 50s. It was the product of selective breeding. They're trying to put traits into the grain that make it resistant to some of the pathogens that were impacting grain at the time, funguses and molds and stuff like that. They weren't doing it for high yield, and they weren't doing it for homogeneous flavor. They were doing it because, well, you taste these old grains, and they all taste different. You could have 6 different kinds of wheat sitting in front of you, and none of them taste the same, and all of them taste great. And you do a combination between a modern commodity soft white wheat and this old school organic soft white wheat, it's not even a question. So you think about if you've ever tasted distillate right off the still, wheat distillate or rye distillate, or even a brandy, and the difference between an apple brandy and a grape brandy, you can't deny that base flavor that's in that ingredient, the rye or the wheat or the apple, especially with fruit, it's a lot more pronounced. Corn is always a little bit musty. That flavor is in there from that natural ingredient. Even when you run it through several passes through the still, it's still in there. And if you start with a grain that's clean and you start with a grain that has a better flavor, it just goes. You got the proof right there that says that flavor transits the process. So you just end up with a better flavor. And for me, still, even if I think that there's a lot of forces that are going against organic production right now. You have people people that sit on boards and in groups that work for the government that are writing the rules for organic production and adding this, and now this has to be, this has to be special and this has to be special. And these people all work for companies like, Agritech and Monsanto and everything. A lot of times you have these panels that are writing the rules, and most of them are from a competitive industry. So when we get to the point where they say that to make an organic whiskey, you have to have an organic or oak barrel. So when we get to that point, then it's all over with, because there is no such thing as organic oak forests, and nobody's making organic oak barrels. And at that point, that would be I'm certain that somebody's working towards that, because there's a lot of money involved in controlling the food chain. So,
right. I'd like to go back to something you said about your whiskey collection.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a bottle from back 1870 ish.
1876.
Have you? And I apologize if this is a silly question. Have you actually tasted that whiskey?
So my rule is that when I get a bottle, unless I've got a duplicate of it, if I get a bottle, the first thing that I do is I open it up and I taste it. It doesn't matter when it was made. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because to me, the only value that an antique whiskey has, it's the same value that any whiskey has. I'm not a collector, and I'm not an investor, because I'm sitting there and I'm hoarding my bottles and keeping them safe, and then I'm going to spin them off on the black side of the market and make a gigantic profit at it. That's really, to me, it's about sharing it, and it's about using it as a way to educate myself and educate other people that these products were out there and that they're fantastic. And it's a way to draw a line between what they used to make and what we make today, and to say, we can find a way to make product this good. We just have to figure it out. Before there was high-speed gas chromatography, and before there was electron microscopes, and before we had computer algorithms that were running our cuts on the still, and before we were using refractive technology to determine what was in the distillate, all this other stuff. Before any of that, you had guys that were making this stuff. It wasn't by the seat of their pants. They understood to the degree of science available what was going on, but they had to figure out, well, how do we get in the middle of that process to make a really good product, and then how do we make it consistent? And whether they understood completely what was going on doesn't really matter. You don't. I mean, if you were going to talk to Michelangelo, and ask him if he understood the chemistry of paint and exactly how it was going to dry and all of the rest of these technical things. It's like, okay, well, let's look at the work. What really matters? Is it the understanding of how it got there, or is it understanding what happens when you're doing it and just using that as a base for what you have to do, and then just striving to make it excellent? I think it's really the latter. The former doesn't matter. It's a nice to have now to be able to run samples through gas chromatography and to be able to analyze what you have. It's great to have that, and it informs you of where you are in your process and what you might have done wrong if you're trying to remedy something. But it's not a set of thresholds in a computer that once you reach a place, okay, all of a sudden everything changes now. It's like, no, you have to, you can do it that way, but doing it by hand, I think you're making a product that people are gonna consume. People's array of what they can smell and what they can taste is incredibly sensitive. People can taste things down to 3-4 parts per million, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, the computer can tell you what's in there, but you probably, if you study it, you can find a way to tell yourself as well.
Okay. So out of your collection, can we narrow it down to one? Is there one that has risen above all? Like, you're like, this is amazing.
Oh, there's so many of them that are amazing, but there's a lot of these whiskeys that are very surprising, and it's hard to you taste them, and it's hard to get your head wrapped around the how massively good they are. But there was a distillery in Maryland called Orient, and there was a whiskey collector who was actually related to the owner and the master distiller of this product. And the distillery went out of business during Prohibition. But prior to that, this gentleman had collected a lot of barrels of whiskey and then had them bottled. And he passed away early 1900s. His wife, who had his estate, passed away in 1943, and then all of these bottles went up on the auction market. They actually auctioned them off. They held an auction at the Ritz-Carlton in I think it was in November of 1943, and the majority of these bottles were purchased by big fancy restaurants that were using the bottles to pour for their best and most wealthy customers. And so this stuff got bought, and then they just poured it out, and people loved it. And that's what you should do with it. You should drink it. But I have a bottle of 1890 Orient Rye, Maryland Rye whiskey, which is different than Pennsylvania Rye and Kentucky Rye and Indiana Rye. They were all different back then.
Okay.
And it is probably one of the most unreal spirits that I have in my collection. There's a lot of them, but it is one that kind of stands out. It's like nothing that I've ever tasted before, and it's a favorite. I don't have much of it left. In fact, I decanted it in a little 200 ml bottle just so it wasn't exposed to so much air. But I'm doing I challenged myself at the beginning of this year, because I always wanted to write a journal or write a book or something. And I never knew, do I have the discipline to make myself do it every day? Can I actually sit down and do this every day? So I decided to combine my collection with my challenge. And I started an Instagram post called My Year of Whiskeys. And so each day I take a photo and I profile one of the bottles of whiskeys from my collection. Some of them are new, some are outstanding new whiskeys, and a lot of them are unbelievable old whiskeys. And so I give a little bit of history. I do a comprehensive set of tasting notes, as comprehensive as you can do on Instagram. They're not very generous with for somebody long-winded like me, you got to really pick your words to so that you don't run over the limit. But so I've been revisiting this whole year since the 1st of January. I've been revisiting all these old bottles in my collection, and I'm still staggered by the quality of some of them, that they're so good. Even things that you would think you would consider to just be a run of the mill, like a 40s bottle of Old Grandad, which now is on the bottom shelf.
Right.
A 40s bottle of Old Crow. It's probably those two. Those whiskeys are probably some of the best old whiskeys that you can find. That product is so good, and people just don't have a clue. The company that Jim Beam purchased Old Overholt and Old Grandad and a couple of other, and Old Crow and a couple of other products in the 80s from a company called National Distillers. And National Distillers was the company that made all this great product right through the 80s. And then it went into Beam's portfolio, and some of it went into a couple other portfolios. But Beam has done a great job of building up the portfolio of brands that it bought, that it created itself. All their small batch set is fantastic. Basil Hayden and Booker's and those, they spent a lot of time polishing those up and making them really phenomenal. It tends to be that the brands that they purchase, like these older brands, they really haven't done a whole lot with them. They've changed the recipes so that they're easier to make and they're not as dynamic, and they're still pretty good, but they're not what they used to be. Old Grandad might be a little bit of an exception. The Old Grandad 100 proof is a pretty solid product for less than $20 a bottle. It's probably one of the best $20 whiskeys out there. So,
okay, I'm struggling to wrap my brain around the idea of actually trying, 1890s whiskey. Just
it's weird.
I totally get why you should, but I'm struggling. Like I if I were to own that, if I would be brave enough for myself to try it. So I think it's fascinating. I'm going to go. Yeah, I didn't know you were doing this Instagram thing. I'm going to have to check that and I'll put it in the notes, because that sounds fascinating that you're doing that every day.
You should take, so, I mean, even whiskeys, even older whiskeys that are just run of the mill, early times. I mean, now, which is not as, some products that are really good, but for the most part, a lot of these old methods and a lot of this really expressive grain and a lot of the natural yeasts and a lot of the either natural enzymes or barley malt that they were using really just did a good job at what it was doing. And back then you could make what you could make, and you could get a certain yield out of a batch of mash, and you weren't striving to get more. You were striving to meet what this is about, what we're going to get, about 8% alcohol by volume. Doesn't seem like it's a whole lot, but now with genetically modified enzymes and other things, you can maybe increase your yield up to 10, 11, 12% for a whiskey type product, maybe even more for a clear spirit like a base for a gin or a vodka. But to do that, you're really using technology to turn something into a carbohydrate that wasn't really intended to be a carbohydrate. You're getting a little more alcohol out of it because the yeast eats carbohydrate, eats sugar, and then it produces alcohol. And I don't necessarily know that that's the best thing, that you're getting a higher yield of alcohol, but is it really, is it the alcohol that you want? For me, I'm resigned to living in the caveman days and doing it old school with all of these old inputs that we have here, and just trying to perfect it as much as we can perfect it, and then to continue to work on recipes and to continue to work on aging programs, and just to just whittle it as much as you can to make that stick as sharp as you can make it. So it's as good as it can be right now, and then always focusing on trying to make it better.
Well, it's obvious because you've won numerous awards for multiple products here.
And you can knock me over with a feather on some of that stuff. I wanted to make good stuff. I never knew we would win world's best vodka and world's best wheat whiskey 6 times now. It's to me, it's awesome, but it certainly wasn't expected at the beginning.
So I want to ask you to educate me on something here, and I'm going to probably mispronounce Mizunara. Mizunara.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm aware that Japanese whiskeys have there's some really great Japanese whiskeys out there.
There are.
And so first off, so this is, I jokingly say, this is my show. I get to ask the question, so I get to learn. How would you define a Japanese whiskey? What makes it different than, say, an American whiskey? And that might be a really naive question, but first off, can you just explain that to me, what the inherent difference is?
Well, I think the origins of Japanese whiskey are pretty young. They didn't really make whiskey in Japan until the 1920s. And pretty much up until really modern times, the majority of the Japanese whiskey that was being made was made on the Scotch model. So the barley was coming from Scotland, and they were using yeasts from Scotland, and they were using stills that were patterned after Scottish stills if they hadn't been made in Scotland. The guy who first made whiskey in Japan learned how to distill in Scotland, and his wife was Scottish, and she was the daughter of a big distiller. So
okay,
that's how it started. But I think that the distillers in that country have a different perspective, and I think that they're looking for excellence, and they're looking for inspiration, and they're looking for nuance, and they're looking for new avenues to travel, but always really well thought out, and always with a plan in place, and always with an eye to making it as good as it can be. They make Suntory has Suntory White Label, which is just their version of a light whiskey that kind of like a lighter flavored Scotch, but something that you use to make highballs with, or something we would use to mix Coca-Cola or ginger ale with here. But the serious whiskeys are kind of made along the Scotch model, but they've been branching out quite a bit into doing other things with different grains and with different kinds of yeast, different woods. Mizunara is back on the map now. It's become a cult wood to age whiskey in. It's really difficult to get, but if you can find a supplier, then it does some really marvelous things. There's no other wood like it. There's seriously nothing else that makes a whiskey taste like a Mizunara whiskey. So, and the reasons that there's not very much of it out there are just that the barrels are the barrels and the wood are it's really hard to get, and the barrels and the wood are very expensive, and it's always going to be a fringe thing, just because there's not enough wood out there to really make barrels to do gigantic type production work.
Okay. And so yours just, won double gold for the best single grain whiskey recently.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
The bottle that it is in my opinion, beautiful. It's a piece of art.
Thank you.
What inspired you to try that? to go that direction?
Well, actually, it was so. My philosophy is really to not try to do something that is copying something that another distillery is doing. If somebody's doing a great job of doing something, and I don't think that I could find a better way to do it, then usually not going to go that way, because it's hard enough to come up with a unique thing, and then to have a bunch of people jump on top of it and try to copy it. So that's bull. So there was a village on Bainbridge Island in the 1880s, and it was there till through the middle 20s, and it was called Yama. And in Japan in the 1880s, there was a lot of upheaval due to the government and the society westernizing, and different classes of people were kind of either thrown off their land or thrown off their role as being samurai, or there was just a lot of upheaval there, and there was a lot of immigration out of Japan at that time, and a lot of it came here. And we had a village that was set up here called Yama, out by Blakely Harbor, where there was a big lumber mill. And the people that came over here, first off, were just men, and a lot of them were working at the mill, and then they sent for their families, and then they created this village that was up on the hillside, and it stood until the timber industry collapsed and the mill shut down. And then a lot of people moved to other places on the island and took up different tasks, and some people moved off the island altogether. And this village, by the middle 20s, burned to the ground. The fire started there, and it burned down. And it just stood. It's on a really terrible piece of land that is hard to build on. It was covered over with ivy for decades. And the Parks Department here was looking at doing some work on the site to maybe open it up so that they could have some trails through there, and maybe some bike trails, and maybe I had even heard some motorbike trails. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
And people, and there's relatives of the people that lived in Yama that still live here on Bainbridge Island. And there's a lot of people that really have an appreciation of history and of historical preservation. And there was a cry that went out that said, no, we can't destroy this site. And some research was done on it, and it was determined that it was one of the last first-generation Japanese immigrant village sites that was still in existence, that hadn't been developed over. There wasn't a parking lot on top of it, or an apartment building, or a housing development. It was still pretty much the way that it was when it burned down and the people just left. And so we decided, and there was a lot of talk about putting together a foundation and starting to collect money and doing some examination of the site. An archaeological dig was in the conversation. They wanted to catalog everything and really gain an understanding of what that 1880s immigrant experience was like, and then to expose that and use it as an educational tool, and to really just preserve everything, preserve what we could know of it before all of that was gone. And so I decided, well, I've always thought, hey, we should be supporting all these local things more than supporting things that are in these far-flung places. We can have a bigger impact at home, and we could throw some money at it, but we also could maybe make a product, and we could sell the product, and we could throw that money at it, but we also could gain a lot of notoriety and a lot of exposure for the issue, which in this point was preserving this Yama site. And we could get people involved in it in a way that wasn't just, hey, we're throwing money at it. We could get them involved in this visceral way, where they were looking at the whiskey and they were understanding what had gone on, and they were valuing the whole thing. And to me, that's the money shot. When you can do something like that, then people are remembering it, and they're really understanding what you're doing, and you don't have to go out and sell all that stuff. They take it in when you approach them through an avenue like whiskey that they might already be interested in. And so for the first 2 years that we had this product, we worked on this product for quite a while, and it was very, very difficult to pull off with sourcing the oak and everything else. It took us 3 years just to source the oak for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Building barrels in Arkansas with this wood, which is really difficult to work with. And we launched it for just under $500 a bottle. We sold it for $4.99. And then for the first 2 years, you got a certificate. You got a tax certificate. So we'd sell it for $4.99, and then $3.99 was a donation to the Bainbridge History Museum and the group that they had put together that was working on the archaeological dig and curating the elements and the artifacts. And so all that money was donated to the Yama project. And we kept $100 a bottle, but with what it cost to make it, that project was in the red until recently. So we still make donations on the sale of that product, just not to the extreme amount. The Yama project is over, and they've already done all the work there. So, and that's something that we'll probably do again. We'll probably create a whiskey that has something to do with the history of the island and use it to pull in funds to try to solidify something that might be slipping away.
Oh, that's outstanding. I'm a whiskey fan. I'm not an educated whiskey fan. I'm just a whiskey fan. So I'm not, I just asked you a very naive question, right? So I am not a vodka or gin aficionado, but you guys also are doing vodka and gin.
Yep.
What was the inspiration for those products?
I think the real inspiration, I had an appreciation for whiskey opening this company up. I didn't really have an appreciation for the other spirits. You're looking for a way to, when you do whiskey, you're going to be tempted to release it before it's really ready if you're trying to drive revenue with it. And so a lot of distillers start out they make whiskey and they put it in barrels, and then they make vodka and they make gin, and they sell the vodka and gin for cash flow while the whiskey's aging. And so I don't think that we were any different in that, other than that we were looking for a unique way to do it. And I think that we did. We make a vodka with soft white wheat, 100% soft white wheat, and we use a yeast that really concentrates some floral and vanilla flavors in it. The yeast isn't really intended to be used on grain. It's intended to be used on sugarcane, but out of the trials that we did, it really gave an earthy, pleasant character to the vodka, and so we went with that. And then we developed a gin, which utilizes 10 different botanicals, including organic Doug fir fronds. So we're kind of adding some more dimension to the evergreen component that you normally would only get from juniper, which can be kind of harsh. But and so you kind of dimensionalize that evergreen component, so it's a lot fresher. Our production technique on that also allows us to get more of a fresher, less astringent product. And those have both done really well. I love both of them. We've actually done some barrel aged gins also to add a little bit of a woody flavor to it. So they're great products. I think that they're not our focus. Our focus is really whiskey. I think if you look at our portfolio, we have one vodka, we have 2 standard gins, and 1 limited edition gin where the gin is aged in Islay whiskey casks. So smoky whiskey casks, which is really interesting. And it's definitely not for everybody, but bartenders love it. It really makes a unique gin cocktail, especially when you're adding other things to it, adding bitters or adding other liqueurs to it. Makes it really interesting. But on our whiskeys, we have We've got 5 whiskeys that are in, actually 6 whiskeys that are in continuous production. So we have our Battle Point, which is our standard wheat whiskey. We've got 2 Islands series of whiskeys that start as Battle Point. So when we have barrels of Battle Point that are done, we are emptying them into casks that held products from other islands around the world. So we have an Isla whiskey cask, Battle Point. We have a Barbados cask, and we have a Hokkaido Mizunara cask. And then we have our Yama whiskey, and then we have our Whiskey 40 Saloon bourbon, which will probably be released in the next couple of weeks. We want to try to get it out for Father's Day. And then that one takes a historical bend too. On the north end of this island, back in the 1800s, we had 2 lumber mills here. We had Blakely, the Port Blakely mill, and we had the Port Madison mill at the other end. And the Blakely mill was like a regular mill. The Port Madison mill had a mill town, and the owner was a teetotaler, and his wife was a temperance activist. And so they had a mill town, but it was dry. And they had a hotel in the mill town, but they only served like 2% beer. That was as much as you could get. And if you worked at the mill, I don't think you could get it. I think you had to be a guest of the hotel. So the people find a way. And there was illegal distilling going on. And there was even somebody that was that had a boat. They had this little distillery on a boat. And they would pull up, and people would go down and get moonshine from this guy in a boat. But not too far over the property line from the mill town, a guy named Bob Impett and another guy named Harry Winchester, they opened up a saloon within a stone's throw of the mill town, and it was called the Whiskey 40 Saloon. And if you read old newspaper clippings from the island, and there's some of them left, anything that was out of control or was unseemly or whatever, that's where it was happening. It was happening at the Whiskey 40. They had a still in the back. They had a card room that members could join. You could be a member of the card room. And then they had the saloon out front. And it was a rough place. It was a log building and with little slitted windows. And but the sheriff was up there all the time, and they're always trying to stop something from happening. But it's a colorful aspect to living on Bainbridge Island. So we thought that was a good name for it, and it's a cool name. It's a fun name. So it's an it's an older style bourbon. It's bottled in bond. It's 100 proof. So it's a legit nice strong bourbon.
I like the fact that you make historical references to things, that you're going back and paying homage to things that happen on the island where your business is. I think that's amazing.
Well, I think one of the things that we didn't talk about was the founding tenet here was to make sure that we're making product that tastes like it came from here. We want our products to taste like they came from a place, not just hey, we have whiskey. We're here on the island. We could have set this up anywhere. If we were smart, we probably would have set it up out in Walla Walla County, close to where we get our grain, so that we weren't transporting stuff all over the place. But I knew that if we set up the distillery on Bainbridge Island, we're in the middle of a maritime environment here. We've got water that's coming by on both sides. We've got wind that's shooting down from the Straits of Juan de Fuca. We really have this maritime character here, and one of the things that is sure to impart character to a barrel-aged product is maritime air, and that's a big part of what we're doing, and even to the point that when these organic farmers are growing grain that's gonna be used for alcohol, they're growing grain that was designed by the ag college that was close to them, that did a really good job of growing in their microclimate. So somebody that's in Central Oregon might be growing soft white wheat, But the guys that are growing it in Walla Walla County, they're growing something that was different. And so the ag school in Oregon probably developed a number of strains of grain. They're still developing strains of grain for local use, and they're using them in Oregon. The grains that our guys used were developed in Pullman in the 60s, and they're using them out here because they were designed to work in this environment. And so you're using grain that's really expressive. You're using grain that was designed to be grown here. And so you're making sure that whatever you're making sure that it's influenced by the ground. You're making sure it's influenced by this place that we're in. And that way it's unique to here. I'd hesitate to be highfalutin and call it terroir or anything, but in some ways, it's you drink 10-year-old Lefroy, fresh Lefroy, when you're at the distillery on Isla, and there's seaweed and kelp wrapped around the pillar or the pilings underneath the warehouse, and sometimes of the year you have decomposing kelp and all kinds of stuff. It's all over the place. I mean, you cannot. The iodine that comes out of that kelp that's in the ambient air that gets through the barrel, you have ethanol that evaporates, and then the ambient air soaks in and takes its place. You can't say that it's not there, because it is there. There's no fooling. There's no other way for an essence of iodine to get into a whiskey barrel that's sealed up, unless you're pouring it in, which they're not. It's just coming in. It's coming in through the air. That's a fingerprint that says we're here, we're legit, we're from here, we're not from someplace else. The place of where you are makes a difference. I wouldn't have a distillery in downtown Seattle. It's like, okay, what, it smells like smog or whatever else is going on in Seattle. I don't know. It's like, we want to have some character to it that's identifiable.
What's next? Do you have aspirations of more varieties? Are you playing around with anything that you would share? I mean, what's next, if anything?
We've
more of the same.
Well, we've done some work with rye.
Okay.
On the organic side, it's a little hard. It's a little harder to work with. As much as we don't use any GMO enzymes or processing aids here, they do a bang up job at what they do. So in difficult to handle grains like rye, those GMO enzymes do a great job. It makes it so that you can really get a decent enough yield out of it to make it worthwhile. So we may or may not unlock the key to organic rye whiskey. I'm not sure. We're doing some work starting up with malted grains. So we do a lot of work with barley right now, but it's unmalted. We're probably going to do some work with malted barley, maybe even with malted rye. Those will be years off. I don't think there's none of the whiskeys that we have now that are in a barrel for any less than 5 years. So it still takes a while to figure it out, to architect the product, and then run your trials, see how they measure up to what it is that you were going for, and then start putting together a production plan so that you can consistently pull it off.
So when you're not running a distillery, when you're not sampling your antique collection, what do you like to do for fun and relaxation around Bainbridge Island, or anywhere for that matter?
Well, I'd say that not a tremendous amount of time for relaxation. So I own another company called Motive Marketing Group, and my business partner and I, we've been working together for almost 30 years now. And when we started this company in 2000, we decided that out of all the things that we had both done in our previous roles in working at another marketing company, that the category that we really loved to service was the beverage alcohol category. So we're specifically involved in marketing of beverage alcohol. The vast majority of it is spirits, and the rest of it would be champagne and then wine, which is probably maybe 10% of it. And we do work for the biggest distilling conglomerates in the world. So we do work with Beam Suntory and with William Grant and Sons. They're the owners of Glenfiddich and Balvenie and Sailor Jerry and Hendrick's Gin.
Okay.
Pernod Ricard. We do work with Absolute, and we all pretty much everybody. So we're very specialized in working with the spirits industry, and I wouldn't have it any other way. We both used to work on other accounts that were really just painful to work on. They just weren't fun. The spirits industry is really populated by people that are really fun to be around. Every once in a while, you get somebody who's not fun to be around. But for the most part, the people are always in good humor. The margins in the beverage industry are pretty good, so people aren't always necessarily looking for a way to do it cheaper. They're looking for a way to do it right, and it's a good place to be. And we've been doing it for a long time, and I think that both of us have we both service different parts of our client set, but it's doing it for 30 years. It gives you a lot of experience on knowing what it is that you need to do to get something done without having to execute a research project or do a focus group or there's experience matters when you've been in the trench for a long time, and there's really no replacement for it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. So I have two jobs. One of them is a booze job, and then the other one's a booze job. And then on part of my off time, I have a booze posting that I do. So
I'm catching a thread. There's vague similarity.
So we when we're not locked down in COVID, we like to travel to different countries, and we have horses, and we have we've got a piece of property out here, and we've got chickens, and it's a nice place to be. It's a really nice place to be.
So if people want to find out more about you and you're in that, where can we direct them?
Well, I think that the distillery website is probably the best place. So motivemktg.com. No, that's the Motive website. That one's like all business
Okay.
play. The Bainbridge Distillers, BainbridgeDistillers.com website. If people have questions or people want to make contact, there's a little bit of a bio up there, but don't spend a lot of time on that. But certainly anybody that wants to know something or anybody that wants to have a chat, they can come in or they can call, and we'll try to talk through whatever it is that they're interested in talking about. This business it's a privilege to be in this business, and it's a privilege to talk with people that are enthusiastic about it. It's a privilege to make products that get to sit on the table when people are having good times and when people are having serious times and people are celebrating milestones. We've got a group of guys that it's a multi-generational thing now. So this group of guys that their family, all the guys, and now some of the women in the family go up to Alaska on a fishing trip every year. And the first year that they went up was the second or third year that we had whiskey, and they brought some whiskey up there. And ever since, everybody goes, "You're bringing that Bainbridge whiskey, right? You're bringing the Bainbridge whiskey." And so that's what they bring up there. They have more to choose from now, but it's a generational thing now. Everybody's involved in it, and to be able to just to have, a little place at that table through your product being there and knowing that everybody is enjoying it and everybody's looking forward to it. And it's become part of a tradition, and importantly, a family tradition. There's really nothing better than that. That's as good as it gets.
One thing we didn't touch on, and I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on it, so we'll close with this. Your tasting room, what can, besides tasting, what else is going on at your tasting room, and when is that available to the public to go to?
For now, the tasting room is open 4 days a week. It's open from Wednesday through Sunday. We're open noon to 5, and you can do tasting flights of anything we have. So there's tasting flights for any 4 of our standard products. There's a separate fee for tasting Yama, which at least lets people know before they spend a lot of money on a product if they're going to like it. And we're just now within the guidelines that are available to us. We are starting to give tours again. We might be working on a virtual tour program, but we love giving tours and showing people what it is that we do and how things work and how the stills work, and to make it as educational. If you have 15 minutes, we can give you the Cliff's Notes, and if you have an hour and a half, then they'll probably come and get me, and then I'll talk about it as long as somebody wants to talk about it.
Well, I'm looking forward to taking a tour. I'm looking forward to coming over and taking a look at this because it's fascinating, and I really think the attention to detail that you're putting in, and I like the fact that you're positioning yourself. If in other words, you're acknowledging that there are good products out there, great products out there, and you want to bring your own variety to that, and not, and find a place at like you said just a second ago, finding a place at the table. I just think it's very intriguing to me, and I tip my cap, and I really look forward to, like I said, coming over and doing some tastings, but also getting a tour one of these days.
Yeah,
so
it'll be fun.
I will coordinate that with you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here today.
And thank you for having me. It's been great.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.